As we continue in the observations of Chapter 5, we can look at the topic of attainable housing. The phrase missing middle refers to housing types like duplexes, fourplexes, bungalow courts, live-work units, and courtyard apartments, which were prevalent before World War II, which have mostly disappeared from new construction since the early 1940s, with a shift to auto-dependent patterns of development and the incentivization of the single household home ownership. The scale of housing in the South Side and Melrose Park are appropriate for these types. Allison Hill has open spaces and infill sites with neighborhood fabric that would serve an ideal location for the missing middle housing types. This is relatively inexpensive property and access to the future transit hubs, car optional living, that we can have walkability and connection down to the Harrisburg Transportation Center. Harrisburg must destigmatize the reputation of the Hill through a multi-point approach, encouraging the development of an export economy, enhancing neighborhood commercial, enforcing the code, and eliminating blight in policing, and also strengthening schools. Harrisburg's typical approach is that the desire to increase homeownership seems to be generated from a desire to increase the tax base. However, taxes are performed by every performing non-exempt parcel of real estate, so it doesn't have to be a homeownership. These are all resident ownership strategies that are intended to have two major outcomes. The first, economic participation of long-term residents in the overall economic improvement of the city and its properties. Second, the improved maintenance of property that is to be expected when local long-term residents are maintaining their own properties. So we get to look at this collective factor of working together in a community and supporting each other in a community. When looking at infilling historic neighborhoods, the new housing types and programs are often outside the typical risk profile. The opportunity to build specialty housing in high quality, smaller scale housing than the market, and banking requirements for comparability tend to follow. Address the rental need, which is a flip condition outside the metropolitan statistical area. It also allows for the affordable entrance into city living and establishing connections within the city and the community. It begins to shift the high-end downtown apartment model focus. In recent decades, the city's housing and development policy has sought to normalize the city's housing stock with the addition of the suburban model of townhome development with fee simple ownership. I have some examples here that you can find around the city, particularly in Midtown and Uptown. Meanwhile, the city's surviving historic stock of large household houses are highly undervalued, indicating that they are not serving as valued real estate assets. There is an opportunity for the city to dominate markets for affordable, high-quality, large family housing and alternative housing types and benefit from the rich diversity of residents that diverse housing opportunities support. The idea of residual claimant is that the buildings change ownership, cities cannot change location. The city has special interest relationship with the property in its bounds. Certain areas of historic building fabric come to represent the city. An example in Baltimore famous neighborhoods of stoops, the characterization may not affect the value of individual properties, but the removal of these features affect the city as a whole. Continue this idea of residual claimant. Much new affordable housing is built with such short life cycle design as to be effectively temporary in terms of traditional expectations of property investment life. Harrisburg's housing stock is experiencing significant undervaluation, but it is important to gauge its potential value as a fully valued market of real estate. We can be asking these questions in the real estate market. What is the aggregate land value of a city with decay? What is the aggregate land value of a city without decay? And can this change in value be captured? And this comes into this observation, and the answer is definitely yes, is that can this value be captured? This is the case for collective place value. Think of a structure right now in your neighborhood. Imagine if you woke up tomorrow morning and that building was gone. Would that matter to the essence of place? So this is a side piece. You can go and look at this as a separate video. I've gone through and looked at a couple places around the city. One of the goals is to get us to think about our place, and that if we lost a building, would this matter? If we consider the city as an immovable collection of assets, its total asset value is determined by the aggregated value of individual privately and publicly held assets. The increased aggregated value is in the best interest of the city and its residents. The city's best interest is served when the aggregated value of property within the city is optimized, and the individual's best interest is the freedom to choose a variety of housing options in a variety of neighborhood locations, not just isolated in parts of the city. The city as a measurable asset, how do we understand that value? The idea of a city combines qualities such as character, culture, location. However, there are many unmeasurable qualities that are most of the time experiential in nature. If we have the privilege to travel for pleasure, we might find ourselves in places that contain examples of intangibles or unmeasurable quality. While urban life in a great city or town is infused with these experiential qualities, policy rarely can control or protect them adequately. This is the problem that we have, is these are things that we can't quantify, that the idea of character and place is outside the realm of our measurement system. This process that does see this inherent value is the replacement cost valuation. This process provides a concrete mechanism that includes the aspects of value material qualities such as the historic building fabric, and urban form. Potential aggregation value exists formally, maybe not in a legal sense, and this is the related character of groups of buildings. So fabric that we talk about. The cultural collection and addition of values of the whole is then added to single building sums. So there's a potential, if we look at the Jackson rooming house, is that value in itself is a collection of the 3 buildings that are on the site. Then there's an inherent value to each individual building as well. Many cities warrant tourism simply to enjoy the experience of a cohesive, often historic urban fabric. People and place matter, not for tourism only, such as Restaurant Row that we have or had started 15 years ago, but for everyday living, that our focus is there's people that are just being here and enjoy this place and want to live here. An attractive city is one that can use the aesthetic conditions to attract the interest of new residents, investment, and visitors. Thus, the creation of positive urban fabric has real quantifiable value, and similarly, its removal has quantifiable negative value. This reduction of value affects the building's neighborhood and the property owners within the neighborhood and the city as a whole, and in a small way, every property owner in the city. The city can create a mechanism that allows individuals to reinvest in the long-term value of an area without exporting the value, creating the kind of localized multiplier effect for every property through the creation of a cultural condition. The city benefits from the use bank, the potential loan or bond value based on a guaranteed replacement value. Where the market value is below the replacement value, building can be calculated using the replacement value. Private property equals the value of the tax basis of the city. Thus, maximizing the value of individual properties enriches the city to leverage additional borrowing, enabling additional investment in public facilities and services. In the future, the use of embodied energy instead of replacement value will make the system far more efficient. Currently, this idea of embodied energy is rapidly growing in acceptance as a design factor in new construction. We also can look at improving the appraisal process, the FDIC regulations. An institution, which is the federally regulated financial institution, board of directors is responsible for reviewing and adopting policies, procedures that establish an effective real estate appraisal and evaluation program. The history of predatory practice that created the misalignment of replacement and market value represents an extraordinary condition. This idea of dual valuation is something to look at. Since the city's financing mechanism serves to guaranteed replacement value, its value should not transfer out of the city. This would constitute a non-desirable loss. In order to retain replacement value and still permit the sale of property, we require a separate exchange value for the property, which would the market-based, and a cultural value or intrinsic value, which would be monetized for the total investment on site for use of site only. What does that look like? This is a way of looking at how do we put a value within a property and allow it to be staying with the property, but also have someone who chooses to move along that they can actually recoup that value. The observation states, while this may sound overly controlling, there are standard voluntary mechanisms of deed-restricted properties typically used to promote high property value developments. This system values several forms of the associated value, including good schools, low local taxes, and adjacency to nice buildings. In areas where replacement value exceeds market value, the benefit is the place-specific and non-commodifiable. Thus, the new investment value and its conditions must remain in place, permanently attached to the property's deed. This is again valuing the city as a collective. The benefit of the improved property stays with the occupants. It's immediate and experiential. The property improvement mortgage would stay with the property over time, being passed from owner to owner. The full value of each structure in the local market is not represented in its open market value. The full value can be transferred to a new owner and not sold on the open market until the property improvement financing instrument is paid in full. And summarizing all this, thus the plan recommends an alternative housing investment fund, AHIF, as a separate managed fund for investment in housing stock. The AHIF would be attached to the property, not the occupant. This provides one mechanism to solve the problem of monetizing for investment the valuation that accompanies a property's intrinsic cultural aggregation value. Thanks again for listening to this week's 52 Weeks and continuing in Chapter 5 Housing with the subsection 6 Observation. This has been a lot of talk about real estate and financing, and it's pretty much deep in this discussion, but the reason why it's so important is that more people need to be talking about this. We need to be more innovative in dealing with the 4,700 housing structures that are vacant around our city. Thanks again and take care.